whatever was leaving the vapor trail, because he was under the central part of it. But he still couldn't see any object. This was odd, he thought, because vapor trails don't just happen. Something has to leave them. His altimeter had ticked off another 12,000. He kept on climbing, but soon the 84 began to mush. It was as high as it would go. The pilot dropped down 1,000 feet and continued on. Now he was below the front of the trail, but still no airplane. This bothered him too. Nothing that we have flies over 55,000 feet except a few experimental airplanes like the D-558 or those of the X series, and they don't stray far from Edwards Air Force Base in California. He couldn't be more than 15,000 feet from the front of the trail, and you can recognize any kind of an airplane 15,000 feet away in the clear air of the substratosphere. He looked and he looked and he looked. He rocked the F-84 back and forth, thinking maybe he had a flaw in the plexiglass of the canopy that was blinking out the airplane, but still no airplane. Whatever it was darn high or darn small. It was moving about 300 miles an hour because he had to pull off power and S to stay under it. He was beginning to get low on fuel about this time, so he hauled up the nose of the jet, took about 30 feet of gun camera film, and started down. When he landed and told his story, the film was quickly processed and rushed to the projection room. It showed a weird, thin, forked vapor trail, but no airplane. Lieutenant Olson and Airman Futch had worked this one over thoroughly. The photo lab confirmed that the trail was definitely a vapor trail, not a freak cloud formation. But Air Force Flight Service said no other airplanes in the area, and so did Air Defense Command, because minutes after the F-84 pilot broke off contact, the object had passed into an ADIZ, Air Defense Identification Zone, and radar had showed nothing. There was one last possibility. Blue Book's astronomer said that the photos looked exactly like a meteor smoke trail. But there was one hitch. The pilot was positive that the head of the vapor trail was moving at about 300 miles an hour. He didn't know exactly how much ground he'd covered, but when he first picked up Blythe radio, he was on Green 5 Airway, about 30 miles west of his base, and when he'd given up the chase, he'd gotten another radio bearing, and he was now almost up to Needles Radio, 70 miles north of Blythe. He could see a lake, Lake Mojave, in the distance. Could a high-altitude jet stream wind have been blowing the smoke cloud? Futch had checked this. No. The winds above 20,000 feet were the usual westerlies, and the jet stream was far to the north. Several months later, I talked to a captain who had been at Luke when this sighting occurred. He knew the F-84 pilot, and he'd heard him tell his story in great detail. I won't say that he was a confirmed believer, but he was interested. "I never thought much about these reports before," he said, "but I know this guy well. He's not nuts. What do you think he saw?" I don't know what he saw. Maybe he didn't travel as far as he thought he did. If he didn't, then I guess that he saw a meteor's smoke trail. But if he did know that he'd covered some 80 miles during the chase, I'd say that he saw a UFO, a real one. And I find it hard to believe that pilots don't know what they're doing. During the summer of 1953, UFO reports dropped off considerably. During May, June, and July of 1952, we'd received 637 good reports. During the same months in 1953, we received only 76. We had been waiting for the magic month of July to roll around again, because every July there had been the sudden and unexplained peak in reporting. We wanted to know if it would happen again. It didn't. Only 21 reports came in, to make July the lowest month of the year. But July did bring new developments. Project Blue Book got a badly needed shot in the arm when an unpublicized but highly important change took place. Another intelligence agency began to take over all field investigations. Ever since I'd returned to the project, the orders had been to build it up, get more people, do what the panel recommended. But when I'd asked for more people, all I got was a polite, "So sorry." So I did the next best thing and tried to find some organization already in being, which could and would help us. I happened to be expounding my troubles one day at Air Defense Command Headquarters while I was briefing General Burgess, ADC's Director of Intelligence, and he told me about his 4602nd Air Intelligence Squadron, a specialized intelligence unit that had recently become operational. Maybe it could help. He'd see what he could work out, he told me. Now, in the military, all commitments to do something carry an almost standard time factor. "I'll expedite it" means nothing will happen for at least 2 weeks. "I'll do it right away" means from a month to 6 weeks. An answer like, "I'll see what I can work out," requires writing a memo that explains what the person was going to see if he could work out and sealing it in a time capsule for preservation, so that when the answer finally does come through, the future generation that receives it will know how it all started. But I underestimated the efficiency of the Air Defense Command. Inside of 2 weeks, General Burgess had called General Garland. They'd discussed the problem, and I was back in Colonel White's 4602nd. The 4602nd's primary function is to interrogate captured enemy airmen during wartime. In peacetime, all that they can do is participate in simulated problems. Investigating UFO reports would supplement these problems and add a factor of realism that would be invaluable in their training. The 4602nd had field teams spread out all over the United States, and these teams could travel anywhere by airplane, helicopter, canoe, jeep, or skis on a minute's notice. The field teams had already established a working contact with the highway patrols, sheriff's offices, police, and the other military in their respective areas, so they were in an excellent position to collect facts about a UFO report. Each member of the field teams had been especially chosen and trained in the art of interrogation, and each team had a technical specialist. We couldn't have asked for a better ally. Project Blue Book was once more back in business. Until the formal paperwork went through, our plan was that whenever a UFO report worth investigating came in, we would call the 4602nd and they would get a team out right away. The team would make a thorough investigation and wire us their report. If the answer came back unknown, we would study the details of the sighting and, with the help of Project Bear, try to find the answer. A few weeks after the final plans had been made with the 4602nd, I again bade farewell to Project Blue Book. In a simple ceremony on the poop deck of one of the flying saucers that I frequently have been accused of capturing, before a formation of the 3-foot-tall green men that I have equally as frequently been accused of keeping prisoner, I turned my command over to Airman First Class Max Futch and walked out the door into civilian life with separation orders in hand. The UFOs must have known that I was leaving, because the day I found out that officers with my specialty, technical intelligence, were no longer on the critical list and that I could soon get out of the service, they really put on a show. The show they put on is still the best UFO report in the Air Force files. I first heard about the sighting about 2 o'clock on the morning of August 13, 1953, when Max Futch called me from ATIC. A few minutes before, a wire had come in carrying a priority just under that reserved for flashing the word the U.S. had been attacked. Max had been called over to ATIC by the OD to see the report, and he thought that I should see it. I was a little hesitant to get dressed and go out to the base, so I asked Max what he thought about the report. His classic answer will go down in UFO history. "Captain," Max said in his slow, pure Louisiana drawl, "you know that for a year I've read every flying saucer report that's come in, and that I never really believed in the things." Then he hesitated and added, so fast that I could hardly understand him, "But you should read this wire." The speed with which he uttered this last statement was in itself enough to convince me. When Max talked fast, something was important. A half hour later, I was at ATIC, just in time to get a call from the Pentagon. Someone else had gotten out of bed to read his copy of the wire. I used the emergency orders that I always kept in my desk and caught the first airliner out of Dayton to Rapid City, South Dakota. I didn't call the 4602nd because I wanted to investigate this one personally. I talked to everyone involved in the incident and pieced together an amazing story. Shortly after dark on the night of the 12th, the Air Defense Command radar station at Ellsworth Air Force Base, just east of Rapid City, had received a call from the local Ground Observer Corps filter center. A lady spotter at Blackhawk, about 10 miles west of Ellsworth, had reported an extremely bright light low on the horizon, off to the northeast. The radar had been scanning an area to the west, working a jet fighter in some practice patrols, but when they got the report, they moved the sector scan to the northeast quadrant. There was a target exactly where the lady reported the light to be. The warrant officer, who was the duty controller for the night, told me that he'd studied the target for several minutes. He knew how weather could affect radar, but this target was well-defined, solid, and bright. It seemed to be moving, but very slowly. He called for an altitude reading, and the man on the height-finding radar checked his scope. He also had the target. It was at 16,000 feet. The warrant officer picked up the phone and asked the filter center to connect him with the spotter. They did, and the two people compared notes on the UFO's position for several minutes. But right in the middle of a sentence, the lady suddenly stopped and excitedly said, "It's starting to move. It's moving southwest toward Rapid." The controller looked down at his scope, and the target was beginning to pick up speed and move southwest. He yelled at two of his men to run outside and take a look. In a second or two, one of them shouted back that they could both see a large, bluish-white light moving toward Rapid City. The controller looked down at his scope. The target was moving toward Rapid City. As all three parties watched the light and kept up a steady cross-conversation of the description, the UFO swiftly made a wide sweep around